Hello, everyone. So before we start the session, let me just talk about the house rules for today's session. For recording, we will be recording this session for those who cannot make it or for you to rewatch this later. Recordings will be available for up to 30 days from when put up. So the presentations will be posted on YouTube. So we are pinning the video so that only the presenters will be recorded. This means you can choose to keep your video or audio on or off. If you speak, the recording will pick your audio and not your name. You can type your questions in the chat box if you prefer, and depending on the presenter, you can private message them as well. Please keep your audio mute whenever you're not speaking, otherwise we might pick up your background noise. We encourage you to check our Sugar and Spice Facebook group for latest updates and announcements. So for consent, please do not contact other participants outside the festival without their consent. You can always ask them for permission through the festival or Facebook page before messaging them. We do not want instances of participants feeling violated or unsafe. For emotional support, please email us at emotionalsupport@sugarandspice.asia. So, hi everyone, welcome to Sugar and Spice Talk Series S&Sx. In this 2-hour evening, we will introduce 3 Asian presenters, with each speaking on a sexually related topic for 3 minutes. There will be a Q&A session afterwards. So our theme for tonight is group speakers. So our first speaker is Jamie Nonis. They Them is an accomplished journalist published in many of Singapore's top-tier luxury, lifestyle, and business publications, including Channel News Asia Luxury, Tatler Singapore, and The Edge Singapore over 20 years. As the only trans masculine presenting journalist in their media niche and a double minority in their field, Jamie is passionate about using their voice and platforms to spotlight LGBTQ plus conversations to help elevate the community while engaging more mainstream audiences through their 2 podcast series, The Jamie Nonis Show and Spectrum, which was created as a safe space for LGBTQIA plus voices, stories, and dialogue. On your screen now is a trans masculine presenting person with short hair wearing a black tee with a small rainbow motif on the upper chest. Tonight, they will be talking about trans liberation, living your truth. Let me turn the floor now to Jamie.
So for most of my life, I thought that I was lesbian. I had my first crush on a girl when I was in P2, and she was in primary 6, and she was the only reason that I looked forward to going to school and lining up at assembly every morning. But I grew up in the 80s and 90s before the internet was even invented, and there was no representation of LGBTQ folk in the media, so information was limited. The messages I did receive from religion, society, and family were explicit, though, that being gay or lesbian is wrong, unholy, and immoral. I grew up feeling like there was something wrong with me, so I began hating myself. And for much of my youth, I lived in the shadow of shame, afraid to even tell my friends in school that I liked girls. Because even though I was in an all girls school, my closest friends would always react with mock disgust whenever the notion of lesbian was brought up. So I felt for a while that I had to hide my true self in order to be accepted. At 15, I cut my hair short, and my new tomboy look confirmed my orientation and earned me the label of Butch. I had my first girlfriend at 16. At 20, however, I got a wake up call that left me jaded and disillusioned for pretty much the next 20 years. Fresh out of polytechnic, I tried applying for jobs. I still remember one of my first ever job interviews for a position as a writer in a magazine. The editor in chief walked into the waiting room, eyeballed me from foot to crown, and I knew in that instant that I had to brace myself for an uncomfortable conversation. True enough, she tried to test me throughout, asking me things like, would I wear lipstick if I had to attend work events or meet clients? Now, what does that have to do with the ability to write, right? But then again, that was the year 2000, 21 years ago, and the discrimination was palpable. Needless to say, I did not get the job. But what I did get was a message loud and clear that I'm not enough the way I am, that I had to be different to be accepted in society. So what I did was, for my very next interview, I softened my look and put on some lipstick. Guess what? I got the job. It was a win in the world, but a great loss for my spirit. It confirmed the narrative in my head that I needed to mold myself to fit a certain aesthetic or expectation in order to not be denied opportunities in life. This was a key moment of self abandonment in which I abandoned myself and I abandoned my truth. I told myself that I had to play the game to survive, that I had to look the part as far as I reasonably could to make it in a heteronormative world. I didn't go to the extent of wearing skirts or dresses, but I made sure to lean on ambiguity whenever I was directly confronted by questions of my sexuality by associates in my broader industry. So that's how I spent most of my professional 20s, choosing to be a little more androgynous in look and ambiguous regarding my orientation. I did what I felt I needed to do so that I wouldn't be discriminated against in the workforce and wouldn't be denied career opportunities just because of how I look or my sexual orientation, which was to prevent a little more androgynous, even slightly feminine sometimes at that time, and certainly not 100% masculine. I used to say that I felt like I was wearing a second skin, a skin that was not mine. To anyone who lives outside my body, especially cisgender people who may not have exposure to the lived experiences of trans folk, you may think that it's just clothes, right? Like, what's the big deal? But here's how it impacts our lives, and it's so pervasive. Not living as who you are, how you feel, or how you identify is a form of self abandonment. This is so harmful to our psychological and emotional well being, and maybe even physical in extreme cases, because it has a direct impact on our sense of self worth and self esteem. It impacts the quality of our lives, the jobs we allow ourselves to go for, and the people we attract into our lives. What happens when, at our core, we feel like we're not good enough? Well, we don't go for the jobs that we really want. We deny ourselves opportunities in life because we don't go for it. We tell ourselves we won't get that dream job or career because they'll take one look at us and won't even give us a chance before they even see our talent or skill. We don't allow ourselves to dream. This obviously affects how our lives turn out, how successful we are in our careers, the quality of people we attract in our lives and keep around us, and the kind of treatment we put up with from others. For me, this lifetime of self loathing resulted in me being quite an extreme people pleaser to my detriment, always pushing my needs to the side and always overcompensating in relationships. I tended to go for straight girls, always feeling like I'm never good enough because I'm not a guy, and that the relationships obviously had an expiry date because they would want to eventually settle down and get married. These were some of the unhealthy relationship patterns over my adult life. I abandoned myself over and over again until it culminated in me attracting a partner in my early 30s that very quickly devolved into the most toxic relationship of my life and was at times abusive. There were many incidents over the 2.5 years, but I think rock bottom was what I did after finding some lovey-dovey text on her phone from a female coworker of hers that indicated she was cheating on me. What would you do if this was you? Leave? On hindsight, that obviously seems like the no-brainer, but you know what I did? I begged her to stay. And she promised that nothing physical was going on and that she would stop texting with that person. So I gave her the benefit of the doubt and I chose to stay. And in doing so, I abandoned myself. I chose her and I chose the unhealthy relationship over myself and my psychological and emotional well being. As you can imagine, I put my own sanity in peril. Of course, I became super paranoid after that, as it triggered all my insecurities and elicited some crazy and controlling behavior, like secretly checking her phone and making sure that I picked her up from work after work every day, which obviously worsened the relationship further. Fast forward to a couple of months later, I found lovey-dovey text on her phone again from the same person as before. I confronted her and I was ready to leave the relationship. But this time, she was the one who begged me to stay. So I caved and continued the relationship for a few more months. I had abandoned myself over and over again throughout the relationship and throughout my life. And even after I was free from that relationship and in a better place, or so I thought, I soon attracted yet another situationship. It wasn't an official relationship because I was the third party, and I put up with being a side piece, abandoning myself time and again where even when we had made plans to spend time together, she would leave abruptly and go to be with her girlfriend because her girlfriend suddenly called and demanded to meet her. If I thought that I had hit rock bottom before, this was really where I began to spiral and my self worth went to a new low. Can you imagine the feeling of literally being chucked aside and how unimportant you're made to feel and how little value you feel about yourself in that moment? So, this toxic pattern between us continued for about 2 more years. Now, I don't want this to be like a sob story because it's really not. I may have been a victim of being cheated on, of putting up with abuse, of being a side piece, etc. But what I want to talk about is what we can learn from this. With better awareness, we can make better choices for our lives and for ourselves. The question, right, is why did I put up with all of that? Why didn't I love myself enough to walk away from that? And why did I allow myself the indignity of being a side piece when I actually did want to have a relationship with that person? Yes, I was badly manipulated by her, but deeper than that, the question is what was inside of me that allowed that manipulation to happen in the first place? What made me such a great candidate for manipulation? The answer may be layered, but at the root of it all was that I hadn't healed from all the trauma that had compounded over 30 years of my life. I hadn't healed from the conditioning of being made to feel like I was not enough as I am from my earliest years and some of the partners that I attracted into my life because it just gave me more and more evidence to confirm that internal narrative. I hadn't healed from all the judgment, condemnation, and shame, implicit and explicit, from society, from family, from school, from the workplace, tied to my trans masculine appearance that had been heaped onto me over years. In fact, I had internalized all of it. So after that last situationship, I was truly an emotional wreck by in 2017 and even had difficulty leaving my house. It had messed me up so bad that I eventually had to do something to save myself, and I finally cut that person out of my life. And it was only after that that I was able to see things more clearly and get better perspective on everything that had gone down. And I knew that I had no choice but to do serious healing work and rebuild my life. As someone who has always been very actively in pursuit of personal growth since my 20s, I then embarked on a deeper healing journey than I had ever been before. I saw a new therapist. We did some few sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy, and they were quite powerful. And I put my entire life under scrutiny for systematic healing. Self acceptance and self love were very big themes for me. I discovered that there was still so much work that I needed to do in those areas. And it was around this time in my late 30s that I started becoming more aware of the term transgender. Up until that point, I had only understood the term in relation to trans women, which were more visible, and my own self identity was mixed in more with that of lesbian, which I never fully embraced, and butch, which I kind of detest due to its derogatory connotations. Um, then I discovered the T Project, which is Singapore's first and only social service organization for the transgender community. And they offer useful services for the trans community like counseling, and I've been seeing a trans male counselor for about 2 years. It's been pretty life changing. I'm actually so grateful for last year. I used to travel for work a lot, and staying grounded in Singapore gave me more time to commit more consistently to my healing journey. And I've managed to heal deep, deep layers of trauma starting from childhood. It's also helped me love myself more and embrace my trans identity and step into fully into it without shame, which had always loomed over me like a dark shadow throughout my life, and which I hadn't been able to shed up until that point. In doing all that inner work, I finally came to a place of self-acceptance and that enabled me to publicly come out as trans last year in 2020. It also enabled me to finally launch a Spectrum podcast as a safe space for LGBTQ voices, stories, and dialogue, which was something that I had been wanting to since 2 years before. And now I can use this platform to help others. What I've learned from this journey is that amazing things can happen when we break free from the shackles of shame. Don't underestimate the power of standing in your truth and living your truth. Because by being true to ourselves, we're essentially living in integrity with ourselves. When there's internal alignment within us, things fall into place and flow more easily. And we can show up as our full selves, and people get to see and experience who we really are. rather than just knowing a part of us with the rest hidden away. And when we feel better about ourselves, we attract better things into our lives. Today, my self worth is no longer defined by others. It's no longer defined by the fact that I choose to wear a suit instead of a dress, or choose not to wear lipstick to work. Alignment and integrity are my utmost priority, and I will no longer subject myself to people and environments that require me to abandon myself. As a result of all this inner recalibration, my life right now is completely unrecognizable from when I was at my lowest point in 2017, when I was forced to begin this deeper healing journey. And it's pretty amazing. Sometimes I can't even believe the incredible opportunities that I'm attracting today. I'm a different person than I used to be. I'm more of myself than I've ever been. And that sense of liberation and living free to be who I am is absolutely priceless. And with that, I invite you to own your truth, live your purpose, and achieve extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. So we're open now for questions. I have some here already. So, Jamie, have you thought about going through sex change now that you identify as a trans person?
Yes, I have. I have definitely thought about it, but it's kind of complicated because there's the whole family aspect and your parents and having those kind of talks, and then living, having lived like 40 over years actually as female, it's going to be different in society as well, and how society perceives you as male. So I need to go deeper with my current counselor to talk about these things, to really explore. I've thought of going for HRT as well, and hormones, not HRT, sorry, hormone therapy. Yeah, but I haven't quite decided. So I'm still on that journey of deciding whether or not to take that next step.
Second question would be, when did you know that you were trans?
So it was, I think I started realizing it in 2018, which was only 3 years ago. I've been tomboy for most of my life, couple of decades already, but I think the term trans has only like come into like social vernacular very recently. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but it's suddenly become a buzzword recently, I feel. And yeah, so I realized, okay, then I also interviewed, June Chua from the Tea Project, the founder. So she was the first person that I interviewed for my podcast. And then that's how I got to know about the Tea Project. And then I started to like look into this area more, to educate myself about this. I mean, up until then, I honestly didn't realize it just wasn't significant trans male. I didn't quite make that connection for some reason. Like trans women, we see, I mean, we have more like understanding about, I guess it's a bit more familiar, but trans male, not so much. So honestly, I didn't even think it might be even possible until 2018.
So Matt is raising his hand. Matt, you can write down your message or you can actually speak.
Hi. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's really been valuable to understand. Um, I We have a 5-year-old son who is quite gender fluid, and to some extent, he identifies much more with the feminine side than he does the masculine,
Mm-hmm.
and he's only just turned 5. So we're sort of at the crossroads of, is there something we need to do to support him along this journey? Or do we wait till he gets to school and the system sort of, consumes him? What would your advice be?
First of all, like I want to thank you for being so open-minded and coming to this session and wanting to help your child at this young age. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. Just to share a little bit of my story when I was around that age. I hated wearing dresses, and I would kick and scream and cry when I was put in a dress. Um, but I was forced to, especially for like special occasions like weddings and all that. And it caused a lot of trauma inside me. And on the surface, like I, because I was young and the adults around me thought it was cute or it was funny and that sort of thing. They didn't realize the magnitude of the trauma that they were actually creating. And this is something that I had to work on through my therapy and all that. So I would suggest, to let him be free to express himself however that he wants to express himself. If he likes more feminine stuff, let him. I don't think there's anything that you need to do at this point, maybe until it becomes more apparent what his direction is going to be or what he wants to do.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And at home, he's so free to express who he is. And, he's a real fashionista in the making.
That's great.
But he knows when he's on, as is the world that we live in today, on a Zoom call or a Teams call or FaceTime with family, he quickly will, shed some of his clothing so he doesn't look, like how he's looked all day, and that might be in some sort of costume. So I
Okay.
I worry that the balance of societal pressure, and as much as we can make it inclusive in our home,
Yeah.
we can't really, and he already understands the societal pressures of what it's like to be different on the outside.
Right. Yeah. I think the best thing you can do is to just keep reassuring him that he's okay the way he is and that he's loved the way he is. I mean, honestly, that's what we really want, and that is so beautiful.
Thank you. And that's what we're doing. Hopefully it works. But thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for sharing.
So here's another question. It's not really a question, but more of, if you are able to talk to your younger self now, what would you tell them?
I would tell them like exactly what I just said. You are fine the way that you are, and you don't have to change for anybody, and that you don't have to actually wait or ask for or need acceptance from anyone. As long as you accept yourself, that's the most important thing.
So last question. So somebody asked, are you currently in a relationship? And as a trans person, how do you find these people you date?
Yep. I'm currently not in a relationship. I've been taking a bit of a break over the last few years to do all that very, very deep healing work. I recognize that there have been that I have patterns inside of me or within me that I need to work on and I need to heal before I can be effective in a healthy relationship. That's how I feel. So I'm taking a little bit of a break. That's a very good question about how do I find, because like I'm asking myself that as well. Um, because how I know that there's a distinction between me being lesbian versus trans is that I find that I'm not really attracted to other lesbians. I tend to be attracted to straight women. And when I was younger, I used to beat myself up about it a lot and say like, "Why are you so stupid? Why are you falling for a straight girl? Because she's gonna leave eventually." And blah 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 blah. So it is kind of tricky to navigate, I would admit. And at this juncture, especially at this age range, I think it's getting trickier. So yeah, I'm not sure how to go about it, to be very, very honest. But I believe that I just have to focus on getting myself to a good space and getting myself to the right headspace and heart space. Then I'll think about relationships next.
Okay, so there are no other questions. So thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing with us for tonight. Who you are and what you stand for. So let's proceed to the second speaker. So speaker number 2 is Dr. Rika Cruz. She is a psychologist, a media personality, and an entrepreneur. She has a PhD in psychology and had further training and certifications in sex and relationships therapy from the University of Guelph, Cambridge Alliance, Harvard Medical School. Oops. Okay, wait, sorry. And the Society for Scientific Study of Sexuality. Her expertise is focused on Filipino sexual behaviors and sexual pleasure, and her practice revolves around individuals and couples with sexual and relationship or marital issues. She provides sexuality education to the Filipino youth and is part of campaigns for HIV awareness and family planning. She has also worked with UN Women and other NGOs to help address gender based violence in the country. As a sex therapist, researcher, educator, and lover, she opines that Filipino sexual ownership is sexier than sex. So I'll turn over the floor to Dr. Rika. Dr. Rika, for our visually impaired friends, may I ask if you can describe us what you look like right now?
Hi, Danny. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I am short-haired, wearing a black jumpsuit and red glasses. I will be sharing my screen for some slides as I go through my presentation, but I will be also telling what I wrote in the slides as my main points. Okay, let me share. There you go. Can you see my screen? My screen, for those who
Yes.
can't see, it says orgasm gap. All right. So good evening, everyone. First off, I would like to congratulate Jamie for knowing the truth and sharing with us her story. I really love what you said, that we have to be aligned with who we really are and we don't have to change for anyone. I resonate with that so well. So I am Dr. Rika Cruz, and I will be talking about the orgasm gap. I'm an educator first and foremost, so I will be giving you some scientific facts about the orgasm gap and how we'll be able to address it moving forward. I know a lot of you already know what this is, but for those who don't, let's define what an orgasm gap or the orgasm gap is. So the orgasm gap is the term coined for the phenomenon that has been documented for over 20 years in literature. And this states that women have fewer orgasms during partnered sexual intercourse or sexual encounters than men. Although other types of orgasm gaps also exist in literature, including between women engaged in partnered sex versus masturbation, women engaged in sex with other women versus with men, and women engaged in casual versus relationship sex. In this talk, I want to focus on the gap that exists between partnered heterosexual intercourse. So what does this mean? So studies have shown that men orgasm between 85 to 91% of the time during intercourse versus women who only orgasm 39 to 65% of the time. And that's a huge disparity. Now, this is not just specific to a culture. In literature that you will find, this is happening globally. I personally actually experienced this. Growing up, I would be in relationships where sex is over the moment my partner ejaculates or orgasms. And during my young adulthood, it was difficult for me to orgasm during intercourse. And I find it unfair. I find it really, really unfair because I wasn't enjoying the sexual intercourse or the sexual encounter as much as they were enjoying it. To add to this, studies found that most men think that their partners have orgasmed even when they really haven't. And that's false perception right there. So, for example, you're a woman and you didn't orgasm during intercourse, there's a high probability that your partner, if your partner is a male, thinks that you did. And with that, he also thinks that he did such a great job when in reality, he didn't. And that's a problem right there. So I used to have a partner who thought he was like one of the best. And those macho types, and who really thinks that he's really good in bed, but in reality he wasn't, because I wasn't pleased at all. And now that I'm looking at it in hindsight, i I kind of think that I'm partly to blame, because I let it be. I let him think that I was okay. I did not voice out my opinion saying that, hey, you know what? That wasn't good at all. But I just let it be and accepted it as it was. Furthermore, there are also studies that found that women were actually 5 times more likely to report pain during intercourse than men. So, and this is not pain that's consensually inflicted, right? Because that's a different kind of pain. That's pleasurable kind of pain. But this is pain that is actual unwanted discomfort. And why do we need to address these things? Because, like what I said, as a woman, I find it very unfair that we don't get to enjoy something as pleasurable as sex. And I believe we as women should really to have what we call now as the orgasm equality, where both men and women have a fair share of orgasms and pleasure during their sexual encounters. So how will we have this, right? How can we address this problem? So to address this problem, we need to know first where the orgasm gap comes from. Before, arguments about that women orgasm less, I'm laughing because it's ridiculous. But for a long time, arguments were about women having less orgasms because they say that our bodies are not just made to have as frequent orgasms as males. And they said that our bodies are too complicated and difficult to please. Do you agree with that? I don't, because study after study have already debunked this thinking, and women can actually orgasm quickly and easily if they want to, right? At least I know I can. After all the training I went through, I think I was able to learn how to orgasm quickly and easily. And I believe, Dr. Martha, I'm going to put you in the picture and say that you learned that too, right? You were taught that too, how to please yourself and how to orgasm the way you want to. So maybe it's not biological. It's not a women's body's fault why there's an orgasm gap. And researchers started to point out that the orgasm gap exists mainly because of social cultural factors and scripts. So what are these scripts? When you look at literature, science have found out that our cultural devaluing of women's sexual pleasure and overvaluing of men's pleasure and intercourse are the root causes of the orgasm gap. So you're going to ask me, how do we overvalue men's pleasure and intercourse? Easily. First off, let's look at the current sexual script that you see on the screen. There's sex script there. I will tell you what the sex script is. First is foreplay. So when we were taught that when we will have sex, we have to have foreplay. And foreplay is for women to get ready for intercourse. Then when the woman's ready, intercourse comes in, and then there's the male orgasm, and then the sex is over. In this circumstance, in this script, the man is responsible to give the woman an orgasm during intercourse. And how will they do that? By thrusting long and hard. And does it really make sense for the women here? Do we really get pleasure when men try to last longer in bed and thrust us harder? No, I see you all shaking your heads. No, right? Because, well, maybe for some, but mostly no. We don't get pleasure through lasting longer in bed or getting hard thrusts. Because sometimes we get dry. Sometimes we actually think, when is this going to be over? That's why sometimes we just fake it, is we just wanted to get over and done it because it just doesn't work. This script doesn't work for us. And another way that we're prioritizing male orgasm is through our language and media. So for example, we use the words sex and intercourse as if they're one and the same, when they're not, right? Because intercourse is intercourse, and sex is an umbrella term for everything that we do. And for some people, we relegate foreplay, everything before sex, as foreplay, implying foreplay as a lesser form of sex than intercourse. But in reality, it's not. It's still sex. So that in itself focuses and puts so much worth on intercourse rather than the other sexual behaviors. Recent studies also indicate that media images of heterosexual sex generally portray women orgasming or getting an orgasm from intercourse alone, if they orgasm at all. There's also a study that I found that says only 25% of the orgasms in Pornhub involve some form of direct or indirect clitoral stimulation. So how they portray women orgasming or having orgasms is false too. So really, what's out there is not what we want to happen if we want women to have more orgasms. So this popular notion actually runs counter to the science that indicates that most women do not orgasm from penetration alone or intercourse alone. In fact, women report more frequent orgasms if their sexual encounters include deep kissing, the fondlings, the manual genital stimulation and clitoral stimulation, and or oral sex, in addition to penile vaginal penetration or intercourse. I can attest to this because I myself have a hard time having an orgasm through intercourse alone, unless I have something that could also stimulate my clitoris during penetration. So these scripts that we are actually ingrained with are not helping us women achieve pleasure. But it's not just the script that's an issue. Fine, we have that culture, we have, those aspects, societal aspects, but it's also actually found in how we see ourselves as women. Why? Because a lot of us women also lack a sense of entitlement to our own sexual pleasure. In my study of the sexual pleasure for the Filipino women, I discovered that most women here, at least here in the Philippines, actually go through a phase of sexual compliance. What is sexual compliance? It's when they see their partner's pleasure as an end goal. So they comply, they give in to having sex with them, even if they don't want to. without thinking of their own pleasure. That even if they do not physically experience pleasure, they feel that it's okay because they were able to pleasure their partners anyway. So they're not really thinking about their physical pleasure. It's more of their obligation to their partners that they're thinking of. And even if the sex isn't good, they would still do it because they want their partners to be pleasured. In reality, a lot of men here, they're Filipino men here, at least here in the Philippines, think that they don't need to help their partners climax after they ejaculate. The stories that I hear from women actually say that, after my partner ejaculates, I have to go to the toilet, to the washroom to masturbate myself. Or they're frustrated. They tell me they're frustrated because they can't finish. And a lot of women here too do not masturbate. So they remain frustrated by not having an orgasm. Or worse, they just accept that this is the reality. So most of them still haven't experienced what a real orgasm is. They think that the arousal or the tension that they feel in their bodies during sex is orgasm. But that's it. They haven't experienced orgasms yet. And it's sad as as a woman because my orgasms are intense and it helps me become a better person, right? So I truly believe that if we have better sex, we'll have a better world because they're just going to be happy people around. So, how can we change this? How can we change those narratives? How can we level the playing field for us women? So, as researchers, as educators, and scientists, a clear answer actually is to provide pleasure centric sex education to everyone, not just children, everyone, even parents, even adults. Why? Because at this point, most of the sex education that we had, if we ever got one, they're focused on not getting pregnant or not getting sick. That's it. But scientists have been proposing that what if we teach our children skills and tools to be prepared about sex and talk about sex and their pleasure? What if we teach them how to be comfortable with their bodies, right, Jamie? And, you know, how to be comfortable with their bodies and to explore who they really are so that when the time comes that they're ready for partnered sex, they can also experience pleasure. And why can't we teach them to advocate for their own pleasure and, say an enthusiastic yes if they really want sex and know how to say no because they know that the sex won't be good or even if they don't want to? And what if we also start teaching parents to have those kinds of talks with their children? Then it will be a different scenario altogether. What else? By teaching these people, we can have a sexually healthy culture. And by having a sexually healthy culture, we will be encouraged to know more about the science of our bodies, our arousals, our desires. And we know how our bodies will act this way and how they will react to sex. And thus, when we know a lot, we will be more able to openly express ourselves and know ourselves, asking what we want and don't want in our sexual encounters. More so, we will start to feel entitled to our own pleasure and be able to say that we need pleasure and we want pleasure, and to start actually demanding and championing our own orgasms during intercourse. And we really need to learn this. And as women, championing for our own pleasure, right? For the women here who already know how to pleasure themselves or how to champion or advocate for their own pleasure, we can then teach other women who struggle to orgasm to first be more comfortable with their bodies. We can teach other women who are still, not comfortable with themselves, not comfortable with the idea to discover who they are as sexual persons. And when they become more comfortable with their bodies, they can have a healthy self-esteem. They can be in a more supportive environment with us there. So they can learn to explore more about what they want and what they don't want. They can exactly know who they are as sexual people. And then when they start to know who they are as sexual people, they will be more comfortable to touch their bodies and masturbate and give themselves pleasure. And when they do that, they can also figure out what kind of genital and clitoral stimulation they need through masturbation. And when they already know this, then we can teach them and help them transfer this type of stimulation to their partners in bed. So, in other words, we help them to engage in sexual behaviors in which they get the same type of stimulation alone when they can pleasure themselves, when they're comfortable with themselves, as with a partner, who they're comfortable with, a partner who they can trust, right? Sorry, I think my voice is really loud. I tend to get passionate when I talk about these things. And through these things, hopefully, again, as women here, we get to be able to change the script from a foreplay, intercourse, male orgasm, sex over script to something that's more equally shared, right? A more equal sex script that includes, kissing or oral sex, where penetration is consistently paired with clitoral stimulation. And hopefully, we will have more chances of enjoying sex. We will have both female and male orgasms during these sexual encounters, right? Because, why I'm so passionate about these things? Because I really believe that us women deserve to enjoy sex too. And that's it for me. Thank you very much. I am Dr. Rika Cruz again, and thank you for listening. I'll stop my screen now.
Okay. Thank you so much for that sharing, Dr. Rika. So I have a few questions here. So how do we get over the sexual compliance that you talked about in your presentation? Because as a Filipina who's in the same country, I kind of understand the problem because a lot of the Filipinos, or culturally here in the Philippines, we don't talk. Like if there's a problem, we tend to keep it to ourselves. So how can we actually get over that?
Then we start talking, right? You said it. You said it yourself. The problem is we don't talk. Then we should start talking. If you have your partner that you trust, right, that you're comfortable with, you tell him or her that you're not in the mood for sex tonight. You don't have to comply, right? And for you not to be scared that you will reject him or her, you can actually say that, I really want to, but my body is not into it. Maybe we can schedule it again. It's not an outright no, but of course you have to give your partner something to hold on to, that so he or she will not think that you are rejecting them and you don't like them. So start talking, and then maybe on the other side, you also tell him or her if you want sex, right? If it's you who wants sex, and that would also make your partner feel that they're wanted and they're not being rejected if you're just saying no. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Dr. Martha has a few questions. So how would you answer this? How many times can a woman orgasm at one time?
Oh, Martha, how many can you orgasm? It's different per women. So Martha can orgasm 6 times. I think in literature, there's a woman who can orgasm 20 times in a row. I'm a kind of person, yeah, I'm the kind of person who just enjoy one intense orgasm and then I need to relax a bit, right? And then I'll have more. Who said 10? 10. There you go. So it really depends on your body and how you what you want to aim for, right, Martha?
So there's another question from Martha. What advice would you give a vagina owner who wants to learn how to orgasm?
You know what? The first thing I tell my students is to look at themselves in the mirror naked and to look at the vagina with the mirror, and then they start touching themselves and see what's pleasurable for them. That's it, actually. It's just being more comfortable with your body naked and knowing what you want by touching yourself everywhere. And it's just you, no one's watching you. So you don't have to be um, ashamed of it or guilty, right?
So where do you think that guilt comes from? Especially
Oh,
or right now that we're stuck here in lockdown, like there are lots of people who wants to explore, but they are still scared to do it. So how do they get over that?
it's where does the guilt come from? It's the culture. I believe it's not just religion, it's the patriarchy telling us that we can't touch our bodies, right? Um so it's difficult actually to surpass that. But if you want to, if you're willing to and you start loving your body more, you can gradually learn how to pleasure yourself and be more comfortable with your body. Mhm.
So yeah, last question. I think you touched up on this a while ago. Like, how can parents open up about topics around sex, pleasure, masturbation, and safe sex practices while talking to their children?
Okay, I really tell the parents to start when the kids are young. I say sex education starts when education starts. And usually they have to take the lead of the children because the children, once they start talking, they ask questions like, where did I come from? Right? Like, what is this? If they're going to point to their genitals, they have to be the one to answer those things scientifically accurately for their children. They can't say that, oh, you know what, that's what how do we sugarcoat these things? um
Birds and the
yeah,
bees kind of
yeah, the
thing.
birds
Yeah.
and the bees, no. Right? Or you were bought from the stork. So we need to avoid those narratives and actually tell the children how they were made. There are a lot of resources on the internet for gender appropriate sex education. One of the resources that I look at is amaze.org. um you can Google it, amaze.org, and they have gender appropriate sex education, which the parents can actually read. So, because a lot of parents come to me and say, we don't know what to say. We're not taught. We weren't taught sex ed. I said, you know what? Google's your friend right now. Because there are resources that they can actually read and watch, yes, with their children. And then when their children ask questions, the answers are right there. And yes, adults need it too.
Okay, so maybe we can proceed with the other speaker. Like we can always talk
Thank
about this
you.
later. So for before I share the next speaker or the last speaker, we would have breakout rooms later. So I think it would be nice to have all the speakers stay, and then we can have breakouts. And if you want to listen in on one speaker, we can bring you there so that you can have a really intimate time with them. So our next speaker is Nicole Pereira. Her is a law graduate from Reading University, UK, who passed the Certificate in Legal Practice, CLP, as well as the Bar Professional Training course. She has been admitted to the Bar of England and Wales, and since then, she has completed her chambering in Malaysia. She now awaits being admitted as an advocate and solicitor of the High Court of Malaysia. During her years in the legal profession, she discovered a passion for championing women's rights as well as the rights of children and has gone on to publish numerous articles on sexual harassment in Malaysia. While waiting to be admitted as an advocate and solicitor of the High Court of Malaysia, she joined MIRM in November 2020, which she has since found to be an eye-opening experience. MIRM, Make It Right movement, is the CSR arm of the Brickfields Asia College, the nation's #1 law school. MIRM has enabled her to pursue her passion in community service while exposing her to the realities and difficulties of day-to-day life for many marginalized communities in Malaysia. So Nicole strives to dedicate her life and legal training, which she has been fortunate in obtaining, towards ensuring that women and children have the opportunity to live a life that is free and without fear. This is something MIRM has enabled her and is continuously training her to do. She is Malaysian of Indian descent. She has tan skin and shoulder-length curly hair, which she has highlighted copper brown. She has styled her hair in such a way today whereby she has clipped her fringe up. She wears dark green glasses, has on red lipstick, and is wearing a pinkish peach blouse. So tonight she will be talking about to live a life that is free and without fear, breaking the shackles of sexual harassment. So now I'll turn over the floor to Nicole.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And firstly, before I begin, as the last speaker, I would just like to thank Dr. Martha for giving us this opportunity to speak on topics we feel very strongly about. It is truly a privilege to be here today. Now, before I dive into my topic, let me tell you a story of what led my colleagues and I, Thirubarasu and Kuan Manukaran, to research further and to advocate against sexual harassment. It all began when during my years in active practice, we were approached by women and men with regards to the issue of sharing of intimate images. Now here what had happened was that when these victims were in relationships, they had sent their nude images to their partner. But when the relationship soured and ended, these partners then went on to circulate their nude images. Now, when these victims approached us, they were absolutely shattered. And it was very heartbreaking for us as well, who were working with them in our journey to seek justice for them. Because we realized that society was so quick to point fingers and blame the victim. And in this day and age, where technology is so advanced, online sexual harassment has become so prevalent. And in this regard, the circulation of nude images has become so easy because it is just a click away. And it is very important to note that sexual harassment is not about sexual intimacy. It is about power over their victims. And it's done with the aim of humiliating, degrading, embarrassing, and demeaning their victims. Now, sexual harassment is so prevalent in the 21st century, and there is no industry or institution that is immune for it, for it happens in our schools and universities, companies, restaurants, movie sets, religious institutions, and it can be even seen happening amongst those holding political positions. I myself have friends who have gone through it, who were sexually harassed by their bosses, and when they spoke out, they were fired. So how do we change things? For the root cause of it is gender inequality. It is both the cause of sexual harassment and the consequence of it. So what can we do to change things? And the first thing to do is to understand the problem of sexual harassment. Now, what is sexual harassment? A brief description of it would be conduct of a sexual nature that is unwanted and unwelcome. So let me reiterate, unwanted and unwelcome sexual conduct. And it manifests itself in many forms: verbal, physical, gestural, visual. I will not go into detailing what these forms are, for I feel we generally do understand what it amounts to, but I will explain a little about psychological sexual harassment. Now, it is relentless, unwanted social invitations, such as proposals for dates, physical intimacy, and unwanted constant texting. Psychological in the sense that women start to feel anxious when they hear their phone ring and when they feel vibrations of a message coming in. And it's so bad in the sense that even if you block the number, they will just change their number and use a new number to contact you. So that is what it means to be psychologically harassed. Then comes the next big question of why. Why does sexual harassment still keep happening? And to understand this, research has shown us that institutions and social settings with these three characteristics allow it to happen. That is male-dominated industries, industries that are hierarchical, and industries and societies that enable and are forgiving of bad behavior. Now let me look at industries first. Male-dominated industries where aggressive dominant behavior is common, where sexualized talk and crude jokes are considered cool by some men because they feel that it allows them to be part of the in crowd, where they feel that they are popular and desirable when they have their way with women, irrespective of whether it's consensual or not. So in these hyper-masculine settings, when women rise up the ranks, these men can feel threatened. So it is important to note that sometimes the most common form of sexual harassment is gender harassment. It is not and has rarely is about sexual desire. It is about communicating to women in subtle or not so subtle ways that this is not their place and that they do not belong. And why do they not belong in supervisory roles? Because it is deemed that they violate traditional female ideals by holding what is considered a man's job or behaving in a manner that is considered masculine, such as being assertive or dominant or aggressive to get things done. So when women are rising up in the world, sexual harassment becomes a way to knock them down again. And it is also more likely to take place where there are large power differences, hierarchical organizations, male-dominated organizations, where these men are able to exert power over individuals who are dominant on them, who are dependent on them, who are dependent on men to survive, such as vulnerable women, children, refugees, and the stateless. Because it is very hard for vulnerable communities and vulnerable women to say no. And when they do say no, it is not taken into account. Their no is not taken for an answer. And when they do say no, they stand to risk their livelihoods and their means of survival. We have seen it happen in charitable organizations as well, where vulnerable communities are dependent on these charities to provide them with their means of income, to provide them with their rice bowl. And if the assistance is taken away from these communities, they are unable to provide for themselves, they are unable to provide for their families. So that is why it is very difficult for them to say no. When a woman is working for an important or a powerful man, he holds the key to her future, and sometimes when it comes to drafting reference letters or promotions or increments in salary or basically job security, women are expected to keep quiet and accept whatever bad behavior is imparted on them. And The spotlight was actually on sexual harassment just a few weeks ago. My family and I, we were watching CNN, and New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, resigned after New York's Attorney General released an independent result which found that he had sexually harassed at least 11 women by kissing them, groping, insinuating remarks about their looks, and created a work environment that was rife with fear and intimidation. Now, this is so shocking because he was someone who was actually advocating women's rights and was a supporter for the Me Too movement. Yet, see what happens behind closed doors. Men who we feel we can trust, who we look up to, perpetuate and abuse women too, which is why the Me Too movement is such an important one, for it emboldened women to come out and speak when society and their legal framework has failed them. And that is why communities should support women when they make allegations of sexual harassment. Now then there is society. And in our Asian culture, it appears to be forgiving of bad behavior. We are very quick to point fingers at the victim and say that, oh, she behaved in a loose manner. It is because of her clothing. She didn't cover up, or she was too friendly with this particular perpetrator. So this permissive, forgiving behavior further perpetuates further bad behavior to take place. In Malaysia, I'll give you an example. A 17-year-old girl, Ain Husniza Saiful Nizam, if you do a quick Google search, this case will come out. She used TikTok to call out her teacher who made a joke about rape. A teacher who told his students that if they wish to rape a woman, rape those who are above 18. Do not rape girls who are 18 and under. Now, this is such a shocking story to learn of, because he was a teacher, he's dealing with students, the future of our country, impressionable students. And it should have been his duty to educate students on sexual harassment and condemn it, rather than further perpetuate the notion that women exist for the pleasure of men. And this joke, it could normalize bad behavior, inappropriate behavior, and cultivate a hostile environment within our schools, which could potentially lead to sexual violence. And now, while Ain had many supporters, a lot of us took to social media to support her and encourage her to speak up along with her friends. Her family was also very supportive, but there exists a certain segment in our community who condemned her. And that is what I found very shocking as well. There were even some of them who threatened to rape her, who said that she was blowing things out of proportion, she was exaggerating, it was just a joke. She should not have taken it the wrong way. A joke about rape is okay. So what happens if one of the students acted upon that joke? What is society going to say then? It was encouraged by the teacher. He did say what? Rape those who are above 18. So what if the student then went on to do exactly that? Now, what needs to be done? What can our leaders and members of parliament do? And what can we as individuals do? In leadership roles, we need more women representatives at the top levels. Now, while it's important to note that women in management or government roles in itself do not eliminate the problem, as women can harass men as well. Men can be victims too. But what we have found and what research has shown us, it is that it is more prevalent in hyper-masculine environments. So that is why we need more women in leadership roles, because we need to level the playing field. And this will then promote gender equality and more inclusive and diverse practices, which can do a lot to alter these hyper-masculine environments. And what can we as individuals do? If we hear or see inappropriate conduct behavior or statements made by our friends, by our work colleagues, by our bosses, it is a duty, it's a moral duty to call it out. We should not just brush it aside and be like, oh, it's just a joke. He didn't mean anything by it. It is a moral duty to call it out because you never know when the next victim could be. It could be you. It could be your daughter in the future. It could be your son. It could be your best friend. And it will hurt when it's someone you know personally. So why not take a stand to protect those that you can protect? Why not take a stand to use your voice for good and stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves? We also need to look at our country's policies and legislations. Now, what is to be noted is that when we look at what our country is doing to protect women, we need to see if there are adequate legislations against sexual harassment, if there are clear definitions, disciplinary proceedings in place, and if retribution for speaking up is prohibited. Now, in Malaysia, for example, we are looking to table the sexual harassment bill in Parliament, but due to the pandemic, it has been delayed. But what this bill would do is it would bring in mandatory oversight procedures to ensure companies handle complaints properly, and it will protect employees as well. It will establish a special tribunal to look into these cases, and cases can also be brought for sexual harassment allegations perpetuated outside the workplace as well as online. And the reason why this gained a lot of attention is because so many women started talking about it. A lot of the NGOs were pushing the government to table the bill in Parliament. So when collectively we speak, people will start to take notice. The government will have to take notice. And that is how we develop, and that is how our communities and our countries and our societies progress. If you wish to find out what are the needs of your communities and what you can do to raise awareness on sexual harassment, the best means to do so would be to connect with your NGOs, women rights organizations, or human rights organizations in your respective countries to see what can be done, what better policy should you be advocating for, and what are the existing gaps in your legislations and in your policies. In your workplace, check and see if your companies or organizations have sexual harassment policies, complaint or investigation procedures in place. Because these companies are not obligated to have these policies. It is not compulsory. Like in Malaysia, it's not compulsory, but it is encouraged. So if these companies do not have it, advocate for it. Now let me look at a different spectrum to this whole issue of sexual harassment. What do you do when a victim or a child approaches you with an allegation of sexual harassment? What do you say to them? We need to be very mindful of the words we use because we do not want to seem insensitive, and we do not want them to be afraid to come and speak out about it. So what I have experienced is never say that I understand what you are going through, because how will I understand unless I have been sexually harassed myself? And even if I have gone through it, we are all unique individuals whereby we process our trauma differently, so we will never truly understand what that person is going through. So instead of saying something like that, we should be saying things like, I believe you. It took a lot of courage for you to tell me about this. Reassure them by telling them that it is not their fault, that they didn't do anything to deserve it, and that they are not alone. That you care about them, that you are there to support and listen to them and help in any way that you can. Now, just a word of caution, when you say help in any way that you can, what you can do is to bring it to the attention of the authorities, or if it involves a child, to contact Child Protection Services. Never personally confront the perpetrator, because you could just be putting yourself and the victim in harm's way. So do not try to be a hero. That should never be something that you do. But what I said, what you can do is to inform the authorities. And now, what to do if you are a victim, if you have experienced harassment, assault, or abuse in any form or manner. If it is your organization, inform HR. For companies are to take these complaints seriously, and they usually have a complaint mechanism in place. There's something called a domestic inquiry where they have to look into it. They have to establish an independent body to investigate your complaint. But if your HR are not taking this issue seriously, you can then go on to make a police report. But I know it can be a rather daunting process to approach, to make your way to the police station, to speak to a police officer and narrate what has happened to you. That is why, again, it is very important to connect with your NGOs, because you may not know it, but there is a wealth of resources and support teams out there. They can help you with obtaining shelter. If you need to move out from your current environment and stay elsewhere, they can help you with shelter. They can help you move jobs. They can help you with applying to different organizations. If you have children, they can assist you with that. If you wish to make a police report, a lot of these NGOs will accompany you to the police station. They will also assist you in making reports to your companies, to HR. But what is important to note is that these NGOs have professionals in place that are trained in regards to these kind of sex-related abuse cases. They have therapists, psychologists in place that can assist you mentally as well to heal from the trauma. And then there's also the other spectrum of those who are unable to speak out. And what I have seen in certain charitable organizations where their livelihood depends on the assistance by the organization, it can be very difficult to voice out the abuse that has been taking place. And that is why these NGOs again play an important role, because they will protect your confidentiality if it is needed, and they will help you by removing you from that abusive environment. So how do we change things? I will just end by saying that when you break the silence, you are free. No longer do you need to live in fear of what will happen to you, because the power these perpetrators have over you vanishes, and the shackles that they have used to bind you slips away. So today is the time to say, enough is enough, Me Too, and sexual harassment ends here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So for the questions, you touched up on psychological sexual harassment. So what are the signs to look for when that is currently happening?
Okay, so I'll just give a personal example. Psychological sexual harassment is when you have already indicated to the person messaging you that you're not interested, but they keep sending you text messages after text messages, asking you out, sending you inappropriate images, calling you at all hours of the night, and keep requesting for intimate physical relations. Now you have already indicated that you're not interested, but you might receive 30, 40, 50 messages a day. This is something known as psychological harassment, because they have not physically harmed you, they are not in front of you, but they have affected you mentally, because it can create a feeling of anxiety. Even if you block their number or you block them from all means of communication, like email, social media, they will still find a way to contact you, like changing their number and calling your number. So what some of us had to do, what I had to do, what some of my friends had to do was to change our number. We had to get a new SIM card so that they really cannot contact us anymore. And what else? They will create fake accounts, fake social media accounts, to add you and things like that. So it's a psychological game, because it affects you mentally, that you start feeling scared when your phone rings or your house phone rings, or when you receive gifts at your doorstep. This anxiety is the psychological effects that arises from these types of harassment. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
So what are some red flags that we have to look out for when signs of sexual harassment is coming up in our relationships?
Okay, in relationships, from what I have observed as well, is when, like I said, harassment can occur between genders, male or female. It doesn't mean that only women are sexually harassed. So in relationships, the signs to look out for is when they do not respect your wishes. Sometimes you don't have to say no, but just by your body language, you're already indicating that you're uncomfortable about the way something is done. But the person keeps pushing your boundaries, so it becomes so toxic that you feel that you are not able to express yourself, that when you try to talk about what you are comfortable with, what your boundaries are, it is laughed at, it is not taken seriously. These are the very beginning signs that you are in an abusive relationship, and one that is sexually abusive, because the boundaries of your body are not respected. And it will progress. Like from what I've seen, a lot of victims that we have spoken to, they keep saying that, oh, it's okay, it will change, or my partner will change. I just need to be a better partner, or, more understanding of my partner's needs, and things will get better. It never gets better. It will deteriorate to a point where you just do not have autonomy over your wants, your needs, or your body anymore, because the partner will be doing as they please. They'll be treating you as they please. There is no respect. So when there's no respect in that relationship, the abuse becomes enormous. It will be perpetuated, and it will keep continuing until you make that decision to leave. So to just summarize, one of the red flags is when your opinions and thoughts and your feelings are not respected, because that will just escalate into worse forms of abuse.
Okay, so last question. It's actually from someone who commented on the chat. Half the time, the ones who have been assaulted want to ignore what happened to them, because being honest with themselves means what happened was real. How do we build them such that they are not in denial?
Okay, that's a very good question, actually. But to really look at it, if a person or anyone, irrespective of gender, is harassed or abused, it doesn't need to be sexual harassment as well, physical abuse, emotional abuse. It has to be from themselves first. There's only so much we can do to try and help somebody, but the first step has to be taken by them. So there has to be a sense of acknowledgement that this happened to me. So if you know of someone who is going through some kind of traumatic event in their life, and they keep brushing it off, like they do not want to acknowledge that this happened to them, it is best not to force it, but what you can do is to be supportive. Because from what I've noticed, there will come a time when they will break down. You can only deny that something has happened for so long before you totally crack inside. And that is when they will need the support of their family, their peers, or their environment, not to blame them, not to shame them, but to help them overcome this. So it's a very tricky situation, because if they are in denial, we cannot go then and force them to come out of it. The first step to recovery has to be the acknowledgement that something has taken place and that I need help.
Okay, so there aren't any other questions anymore. So thank you so much, Nicole. So thank you to our speakers for tonight, Jamie, Dr. Riga, and Nicole, for sharing your truths with us. So I think it's time for the breakout rooms, right, Martha? Okay. So can you help with that? Do we pause the recording first, or do we end the recording?
Okay, we're gonna end the recording so that we can go into breakout room. And yeah, so thank you everyone for being here. Thanks to our presenters so much for your emotional labor, for preparing your presentation, for the many drafts that you did. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and for inviting people to attend. Okay, so I'd like to also thank Dani. And now we're going to go into breakout room where it's a more casual environment. Stop recording.